Welcome to the That's My Dad podcast. Blake Hamby's here. Blake is a dear friend. Blake was in my youth group when I was a youth pastor many years ago at Cherry Street Baptist Church in Tal, Alabama. He was just a little boy, but I was only a little boy too. I think I was in my 20s, so we're not that far apart. And several years passed, Blake, that I didn't see you. I went on and opened the boys' ranch, and you went off to college, and you called me up one day and said, "Hey, it's Blake. God's just led me to call you."
Yeah.
And we began talking. Do you remember that conversation?
I remember it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said God laid it on your heart to do some mentoring, basically. And I said, well, he's laid it on your heart because I've been praying for a kid that needs a mentor. And Raymond was the kid that you mentored, and you came up, I think he was 13 or 14 years old at the time.
Yep.
And you drove an hour every Saturday morning to train with him for a half marathon that y'all ran. You did that for a year, didn't you?
Yeah, I think we did it. Raymond and I were in a relationship for a year, really longer, but the training was probably about 6 months. So
Yeah.
Drive up on Saturday morning, like you said, pick him up, and then drive back to Birmingham to meet the other trainees at 7:30.
Yeah, you put in a lot of time in the morning. It was a lot of miles, a lot of effort. That's a great story. So, Blake, tell me about your relationship with your dad and granddad.
Yeah. So, Scott, when you asked me to do this, I really was a little hesitant, kind of on the fence somewhat, just because I've listened to several of these, and I text Scott after every one that I listen to, because I think I'm either 4 for 4 or 5 for 5 now. I cry and get emotional, and I just get so encouraged by the stories of the men that I've heard. Raymond's brother James was one of them, and just to hear his story and what he's doing in his life is incredible. But my story is just a little different. My dad and I have always had a great relationship. He and my mom really, I think they just celebrated their 50th year, coming up on their 50th year anniversary. And just, really had a great home life, great relationship with my parents. My dad owned a hardware store here in Atala that he bought from his father-in-law, my granddad. And, it was kind of about what I would say just a normal, good, solid family and relationship with my dad. As I've thought about this conversation and just my dad in general, one of the things, and there's many I could say, but, my dad's that guy that I could literally pick up my phone right now, call him, and he would be here as long as it took him to drive here. Like, he was just such a consistent presence in my life, and my mom too, but just so thankful for that. And then my relationship with my granddad, both of them really, my mom's dad and my dad's dad, kind of different personalities, but just great men.
So you're the beneficiary of a generational blessing.
I am, absolutely.
I had asked you to tell a story about your dad. And, I collect these little stories. I call them dad stories. And by the way, if there's anybody out there who has a dad story, let us know. We love those stories. There's just little nuggets. They don't have to be anything fancy, but it's the little things that really affect us. And I said, Blake, do you have any dad stories? I'm working on this book of dad stories. And you thought for a minute. We were having lunch one day, and you said, I really don't. I don't know. I can't think of anything. He took me out for Slushies and Gatorade. You remember that?
Oh yeah.
Tell the rest of that story.
So it was back when I middle school, I think like the first of high school, but was playing football, and so Dad, I wasn't the biggest guy and I wasn't the toughest guy, but I can always remember I would be out there on the field, and I'd look over and you see a lot of the dads standing on the sidelines, and my dad was always one of them, which, I think back about it now and realize how much that means as I have my own kids and try to do some of those same things. But Dad would always be there for practice and kind of watching me, and then after he would pick me up, after we would finish practice, we would always go to the same gas station over in Atala down from Etowah Middle School, and he would buy me a Gatorade and a slushie or an icy. Probably not the healthiest thing, but it sure did taste good. And honestly, as I've grown up, I've been back to that gas station several times. I've been back in this area and just
Wow.
literally just, to get gas or just even just to drive through the parking lot and walk in the store and just think about just that little thing that even still to this day, 46 years old, means a lot.
Yeah, you were 13 at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you told me that story, and you were like, "Oh, Scott, I don't know. It's just Slushies and Gatorade. It's not a really, it's not an exciting story. It's not It's not a tearjerker." And I looked at you, you remember, and I said, "Blake, how old were you?" And you said, "I think I was 13." I said, "You realize this has been 30 years, 30 plus years,
Yeah,
and you're still talking about your dad taking you for Slushies and Gatorade, and you still go to that gas station because." That means so much to you. So I think the theme of your dad's fatherhood has just been consistency.
Yeah,
absolutely. Just be consistent. So what kind of mistakes do you think you've made?
A mistake I make often is I can be around them but not with them. And Erin, my wife, will tell you one of my main love languages is quality time, and so I just like to be around, but I think so often I'll just get busy doing what I want to do around the house or wherever, but I'm not really with the kids. And it really, as they've gotten older, that convicts me a lot of just, am I really taking advantage of the opportunities I have? And there's many other things I've messed up on, but that's one that I think about a lot recently.
Yeah. So your kids are really active. They're soccer players, and they're doing what else?
Right.
They're doing all kind of other stuff.
Yeah, no, they do play soccer. Our oldest, Becca, is just really honestly gifted in kind of performance and creative area. She is always kind of practicing for show choir is her big thing right now, but really she's got a song journal, so she's very into that. She just finished cross country. She's pretty fast. Both of our girls are pretty fast.
They're very well rounded. They're athletic and
and Faith's primary thing is probably soccer and basketball. Her coach said to her recently, he said to their soccer team, he said, if I find myself in a dark alley, I want Faith Hamby with me because she has no quit in her. She will not give up.
Yeah. So do y'all have time to get together as a family and sit down and have a meal on a regular basis?
We make time. I mean, we do that. Erin, and I'll credit her with this. I mean, she's so great about just being intentional about we need to sit around the dinner table together. And I would say that is one thing that I think we have been able to do fairly well and fairly consistently that is, I think, providing some huge benefits. But I'd say 4 or if not more nights out of the week, we're eating together and generally around our dinner table.
So we're going to delve into your story of your daughter, which is a special story. But there's one thing I want to do before we get there. I want to give you a chance to honor your dad.
Yeah. So, Dad, I was thinking about this as I was coming here because I've watched a couple of these, and I thought this question might come up. But, just to reiterate some of the things I've said, you are the most consistent person in my whole life. And I think about when Erin got checked into the hospital, and honestly, so many things were going on. You know what I'm talking about, Dad, with Faith before Faith was here. And the only thing I wanted to do was to call you and just have you come and just be there with me and give me a hug. And, an hour and 5 minutes later, you were there. And I just want to tell you how much that and so many other things you have consistently done have meant to me. And, I think about all the people that came through the store. So often things kind of get made a big deal out of, and they need to be because what people do is important. But I think you really have selflessly sacrificed for so many people that probably will never be known. And I just want you to know I've noticed that. And because of you and so many things you've done, it's helped me to be the man I am. And I just appreciate you and love you.
Awesome. So there's a story we've got to tell that the world needs to hear, And it's going to be here. There's going to be a book coming out about this. We don't want to be premature. It's coming. But it's
never-ending story, it seems like.
Such an incredible story that I just want to sit back and let you tell the story of faith.
So try not to get too long-winded with this, but Aaron and I got pregnant with our second child, and Aaron actually was getting baptized at our church of the Highlands in Birmingham. And Aaron honestly grew up really close to the Lord, knowing the Lord, but she just had something on her heart that she wanted to get baptized. And she had been baptized before, so get baptized on a Wednesday evening at our church. They were kind of having a big event around that. And Aaron said, she didn't tell me this beforehand, but as she was being baptized, she said, Lord, I don't want to just do this. I want you to change my life forever and take my faith to new heights. And just really as a sign of surrender to the Lord. Well, that night, I wake up at about 1 a.m, and Aaron's not next to me in the bed, and I can hear her kind of saying something from our bathroom, which was right on the other side of our headboard in this little cottage we had. She's like, Blake, and so I kind of jump up, go in there, and she's sitting on the commode, and she said, I think we lost the baby. And we sat there that night, and we cried, we prayed, we did what unfortunately I think so many husbands and wives have to do in that situation, because that's such a common thing, unfortunately, for ladies and couples. We go to the doctor the next day, and basically everything checks out fine. And we were just so thankful, so elated that the baby was still alive and healthy. And from that point, for the next probably 2 to 3 months, Aaron just continued to experience bleeding, and the bleeding wasn't getting better. It was honestly getting worse to the point where blood clots were being passed. And we had a situation where we were in Mobile with my parents and my family for a surprise party for my mom. And Aaron woke up at 3 a.m. in a pool of blood, just shivering uncontrollably. And we call my sister, who's a nurse, her and her husband. They come into the room and kind of assess the situation. And my sister, just being so calm, cool, and collected, says, I think we need to call an ambulance. And I'm like, why are we doing that? Ambulance is for sick people. We're okay. We're not sick, right? Mm-hmm. And she's like, I think you need to call an ambulance. Mm-hmm. So we get wheeled out of the Battle House Hotel, go to the hospital there in Mobile, and again, baby checks out fine. And, we're confused. We don't know what's going on. And it's one of those situations where everything we're praying for, the exact opposite is happening. So we get to kind of the weekend before our anniversary, coincidentally, and Aaron starts having really bad stomach cramps. And we've at this point been to the hospital 3 times and always got the same answer. Everything checks out fine. But I could just tell this time was different. So we rush her to the hospital, and the nurse does the ultrasound, and they just don't have this same sense of elation, glee or excitement from the standpoint of, everything checks out fine. They said the baby's heartbeat is there, but there's just kind of a heaviness to the sonogram tech's persona. So I knew something was not right. So the doctor comes in and basically says, Aaron, we're going to have to admit you. And Aaron says, well, I can't be admitted. I've got to go to work tomorrow. And she says, well, no, you're not going to work tomorrow. You have to be admitted. And honestly, honey, you're not leaving this hospital until this baby comes. And she says, well, I can't stay in this hospital for 4.5 months. And the doctor just looks at her and says, sweetheart, you'll be lucky if this baby makes it 24 hours. We were at 22 weeks, and we knew that there was just no chance that really the baby would be born, would make it at that point. So we get checked in, and just a whirlwind. I can remember just laying next to Aaron in the bed that night and just praying, and it was like I saw Mount Everest at the foot of the bed. I mean, I literally just in my mind's eye saw that and thinking, Lord, your word says that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move this mountain, tell this mountain to be thrown into the sea, and it will. And I'm like, I don't have that faith. I don't know where that comes from. And I can distinctly remember thinking, But I do know somebody that does, and it's one of our close friends named Matthew Calhoun. Like, he's crazy enough to believe that this can happen. And so we called him the next day to come pray with us, and he did, but along with so many other people. But the next morning, the doctor comes in, and he literally just pulls out 2 huge handfuls of clotted blood out of Aaron, and that's probably about 5:30 in the morning. He orders some blood work. He leaves, comes back about 3 hours later, and he sits down at the end of the bed, and he's not really looking at Aaron. He's not really looking at me, and he's just starting to talk. And he's basically saying, I've consulted with my colleagues at UAB, high-risk OBGYNs, and the unanimous consensus is we have to induce labor and we have to take this baby. And Aaron is just kind of almost nonchalantly like, we're not doing that. Like, we're not going to do that because the baby will not make it. And the doctor, who we have a ton of respect for, he's a great man of God, and is just basically trying to convince Aaron of the reality of the situation without telling her the reality of the situation, and that is he can't save both of them. And then finally in this conversation, he gets to the point where he just looks at Aaron and says, look, Aaron, I cannot save both of you, and I have to save you. You have a husband, you have a child, and I can assure you my heart breaks, with you. But this is what we have to do. And I remember leaning up. I had not really said anything to this point because I felt like that was Aaron's conversation to have. It was going to put my hand on her leg to say, look, we have to listen to the doctor. We trust him. You know him, Aaron. And before I could get those words out of my mouth, Aaron just looks at him and says, well, doctor, we believe in miracles. We want you to believe in miracles with us. And I was just like, that seems kind of crazy, Aaron. And then right when she said that, the nurse said, well, Dr. Johnson, Aaron's blood work has come back, and her hematocrit, which I know now is her blood count, is 26. And so really what that meant is, I know now, I didn't know then, but it seemed like it was at least enough that she wasn't fully bleeding out. And I can just remember looking at Dr. Johnson, and he just had this confused look on his face, like, that doesn't make any sense. And it ultimately ended up buying us enough time to not make that decision then. And long story short, we ended up being on bed rest. Aaron was on bed rest for 2 weeks in the hospital. We actually got discharged back home for a week, which was kind of strange because they said her placenta was 50% abrupted, which is not going to just reattach itself. And after being on bed rest at home for a week, then her water broke. We go back in. 3 days later, Faith is born through an emergency C-section at 25 weeks and 2 days, weighed 1 pound, 14 ounces. And honestly, if that part wasn't a journey enough, the part then that started with Faith being in the NICU was a whole other roller coaster. It's a long road, and there was a lot of uncertainty within this, and anything from severe cerebral palsy to blindness to all kinds of other issues would more than likely be a part of Faith's life forever if she even made it. And we were in the hospital at St. Vincent's in Birmingham for about a month. Faith did well for about 5 days, which is normal, we've learned, and then she really just started going downhill and got intubated, so she had a trach in her to help her breathe, and over a number of weeks just kept getting worse and worse. She was on 100% oxygen, but still her sats were kind of hovering in the high 80s and would drop below that. I can remember being so frustrated because there was just nothing I could do. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I did know to do, and so many people were doing this for us, was just praying for us, loving us. But we called a prayer meeting one day towards the end of our time there at St. Vincent's and just asked people to come pray with us at the chapel at St. Vincent's. And then we had one at our house later that evening. But as I was going to that prayer meeting at St. Vincent's, I went up to see Faith as I normally did before I went down. And I was staring at her, and I could tell that things were kind of going downhill. The monitor started going off, which was normal, and so I just kind of watched it for a little bit. But it started getting worse, in like her oxygenation level went from 80 something down to 70 something. Then it went down to 60, and then her heart rate starts slowing down, and all these buzzers are going off, and it was just, I think it was busy in the NICU at that time, but nobody was coming. And I just remember being so scared and so freaked out, and I just ran through the NICU hollering for anybody, like, you've got to come help. Like, I don't know what's going on. And nurses, doctor come running over, and they start doing things to Faith. And I can remember standing just in the corner of that little pod, so to speak. You're kind of just, all you have around you is a little curtain. And just standing in the corner watching probably 4 people surround her. She's turning blue. And I'm like, I don't have anything I can do at this point. And all I could get out was, Jesus, help. And it was the only words I could get out of my mouth was just, Jesus, help. And I just kind of sunk down in the corner there. And at some point, probably a minute or so later, one of the nurses came over and put her hand on me and just said, Mr. Hamby, ooh, that Faith gave us a scare. And I was like, is she alive? And she's like, yeah, she's alive. And that's always stood out to me, just from the standpoint of, I don't think as parents we should ever underestimate the opportunity and the power we have to be able to humble ourselves and just say the name of Jesus over our situation, over our kids, and just take confidence in He knows best. It's not to say that things are always going to work out, but I don't know. That has always stood out to me about just how powerful just His name can be.
Yeah. She was released from the hospital.
She was, and so we, got kicked out of St. Vincent's, the doctor.
How long were you there?
We were at St. Vincent's for a month, and then, again, the doctors were incredible at both St. Vincent's and UAB, but the doctors called us one day at St. Vincent's and said, look, there's nothing else we can really do for Faith here. We would recommend her go to UAB. She went to UAB, and she was in bad shape, but thank the Lord, long story short, she started to get better through the miracle of the Lord and the miracle of modern medicine and the nurses and the doctors. But she stayed at UAB for 3.5 months, so she was in the NICU for a total of 4.5 months.
And what was the prognosis when you brought her home?
By the time we brought her home, she was doing so much better. We came home with just a heart monitor. So she had a heart monitor attached to her. She had to wear all the time, but she didn't come home on any supplemental oxygen or anything, which is very common in that world, in that situation. Mm-hmm. But during her time in the NICU, she had, I think they call it like chronic lung disease, like her lungs were her main issue. There's a lot of issues that can go on with that, we've learned, but she just was struggling so hard with her breathing, and that was her main issue from being intubated and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But when she came home, she actually did pretty well. And I credit my wife so much with so much of this, but like the Dr. Carlo, who was just an incredible man, said, you really need to basically not see people for like a year. And Aaron was like, okay. And Aaron's like the most social person, but like for a year, people didn't come to our house. Like people would come over to say, hey, and she would like make them stand at the door and like wave at us through the door. But Aaron just sacrificed, she put her life on the line literally for Faith, but Faith's doing awesome now.
It's an incredible story, and I ask you to tell that, even though it takes a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to tell. I remember coming to the hospital, and you know what we were thinking, the rest of us. We were thinking this baby's going to have some serious long-term problems. 1 pound,
mm-hmm.
one
pound, 14 ounces.
Yeah. Those of us who were friends who would not say this to your face.
Right.
We're thinking this baby's going to have a series of problems.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen.
No.
Didn't happen. You knew we were going to do what I'm about to do. We got a couple of videos from your two girls. The first one, I believe, is Faith. So we want to show you those. This is your pride and joy. That's what makes your heart beat. And I know Becca's every bit as special as Faith is.
100%.
Faith just has a little different story. So we want to share this with you as well as the rest of the world. There might be somebody out there, Blake, who's going through what you and Aaron went through. It's my hope that this will encourage them.
Yeah.
The best thing about my dad is that he's the best he can be. And he does back ride with me and my sister.
What about a favorite story you might have?
One time, me and my dad got pizza, and I just ate one slice, and he ate the rest of the pizza, and he felt like he was going to throw up.
That's a true story.
My favorite thing about my dad is he's always in a light and in fun mood, and he's always like making me laugh. And my favorite time with him was that when we went to Yosemite and the plane ride there, we sat next to each other, and it was really fun. It was just the two of us, and we really got to connect.
That's awesome.
That's a blessing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's just.
Would you ever thought that you'd have this moment 13 years ago?
No, definitely not.
Is being a dad worth it?
Being a dad is worth it. It's it's one of or maybe the hardest thing I've ever done, but it is absolutely worth it. And
let's close by you looking in the camera and telling your girls what they mean to you.
Becca and Faith, you get the opportunity to see me and your mom, as vulnerable and as raw as anybody else. But I can just tell you that you all bring so much just life and joy into who we are, who I am as a person. Becca, we say it often, you are the best of us, and you really are. You love people, love the Lord, and just love so purely, and you have such a heart of compassion that it really it just encourages and propels me to try to emulate some of that in who you are. And Faith, you are so full of passion. Like your coach said, I would want you with me in a dark alley, but you have no quit in you, and you just show a courage that is uncommon among people, and you inspire me to just be stronger, to be braver, and I love both of you so much, and I just don't know that words could really encapsulate how I do feel, but y'all make life worth living. And Aaron, my goodness, I know I'm not always the greatest partner sometimes, but you give me such grace in such space, and you really honestly never quit on us. And I truly mean it when I say often that, my life is better, it's more exciting, it's richer, it's fuller, because you were willing to come along with me and do this thing called life together. And as much as sometimes you might get mad at me for certain things, but you really do bring joy to my life, and I admire you for who you are as a woman, who you are as a mom, who you are as a wife, and who you are as a person. And I couldn't be who I am without you.
All right. Surprised you with that one.
Yeah.
We look forward to you sharing your story, because I think it's going to inspire a lot of people.
Yeah.
Can't wait. That'll conclude this episode of That's My Dad, where we're inspiring fathers to become great dads and breaking cycles of generational fatherlessness. See you next week.